as you see, if you look at some of these numbers that are on the screen right now, I made a little bit less than the last month of August and actually spent a little bit more. So my margins were, my profit margin wasn't as good, although it's still pretty good. We're going to run through all that here in a second. I think that these are good, examples. This is probably, what is September, the 9th month of the year. So this is the 9th time I'm running through expenses and an expenses tutorial to show you the back end of how the business model actually works and exactly, what you're spending, what you can deduct and all sorts of things. And then what you have to, what your take home pay essentially is, and how much you can pay taxes on. I think this is a really good way to kind of show the ins and outs, not just like the tutorials of like sourcing stuff, but also the back end of the business and how I actually run through taxes and expenses and how I calculate my take home pay and my taxes. Now, I didn't, believe it or not, before we get into this, I actually didn't have that many expenses this month. It wasn't like the last month. I didn't deduct anything relative other than the normal commissions and fees. So you'll see the 129 right here on the screen. That's basically outside of the cost of goods, which we're going to get into here in a second. All that I basically deducted, in the month of September. I just ran through all my basically statements. I usually use my my business credit card and sometimes my business bank account to make charges, whether that's on Amazon or I'm, ordering boxes or wherever. But I thought that this was a good opportunity because I didn't have that many expenses this month to show you other ideas of certain things that you might be deducting in your business. Now, a lot of these things are going to be tailored. The examples that I'm going to give you are going to be tailored to online arbitrage or doing, an e-commerce sourcing business like that. However, this just gives you examples. I want to say, always consult with an accountant or a CPA when you're doing this. Do your due diligence. There are certain things that you can deduct. It's going to depend on state to state and all sorts of other things. But I think that this is a really good, opportunity to show you different things that I am under the impression that depending on your circumstance, you can deduct from your business, because the more you deduct, obviously, the less taxable income, so obviously you're paying less taxes and your profit margins are higher. So this is a good way to kind of knock down your tax bill. Let's talk about the numbers and the specifics here, and I'll run through some examples of certain things that you can deduct on this business and other similar businesses like it. So if you look down at the advertising, that's pretty self-explanatory. So car and truck expenses now, that's something that you can actually deduct your mileage if you have a car. If you're leasing a car and making payments on your car lease, I'm under the impression that you can't also deduct the mileage, but since I don't actually do that and I actually own my car now, this is where I put my mileage in. But like I said, you're gonna have to ask your accountant what's best for you and your situation. Now, commissions and fees is always a flat 129 for me. That's like my Jungle Scout and other miscellaneous things. That's basically what you're paying for, certain fees for actually uploading. You can, if you actually want to do this is a question I get a lot. You can actually, basically list your sales and your income and then deduct the fees. Although I don't understand why you would want to do that, because Amazon already does it for you. So when they pay you out, the fees are already deducted from that payout. So you don't need to do that. So we're just going to move on with that. But that's where I put my, like I said, my Jungle Scout and everything else that is a cost for your business in that category. Now, contract labor. That's where you're going to put things like your VA and your prep center. Now, you'll see down here, I also listed some of those here in wages. But this is going to depend, on hours that you're basically paying them if you have full-time employees, or if you're simply just hiring contract labor here and there for a VA or a prep center, that's going to fall into that. Now, if we look at some depreciation, pretty self-explanatory. If you're also deducting, your car and you own a car or your mileage, I'm under the impression that's where you put depreciation, but I'm not 100% positive about that. Like I said, not a tax professional, I just hire an accountant. So health insurance now. And you'll see here I put that you can deduct that as well, obviously. And one of the ways that you can do this that you might want to look into is through an HSA account, which is basically just lets you, if you get injured or, anything happens to you health insurance wise as an entrepreneur, basically you can, write that off. Insurance and other health, pretty self-explanatory. Office expenses, that's so broad, but just to give you examples of things that I've deducted on this business for that is this actual laptop that I'm talking to you through, this microphone that I'm speaking into, this chair that I'm actually sitting in right here. These are all office expenses because I use them in my business every single day. Now, moving on, let's see, car lease. So, like I said, you can deduct your car lease. Now, that's going to depend on whether you own or you're leasing. Like I said, talk to your accountant, but you can also deduct a portion of your car lease, if not the entire thing. Repairs and maintenance, pretty self-explanatory. Supplies, that's like your other, that could also fall into the office expense category, and vice versa. So you're talking like tape for this business model, paper, if you're using, you're printing out paper through your printer. A printer is another great example of an office expense. Boxes, a label maker or labels. All those things fall under supplies, and you can deduct all those from your taxable income at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the year, depending on whenever you're doing it. And that's just basically it knocks your tax bill down so you don't have to pay that much in taxes. Now, travel expenses, pretty self-explanatory, we skipped taxes and license. So taxes and licenses, just two examples of this really fast without diving into everything fully in depth here. Wholesale, so if you're paying a wholesale license or wholesale fee from, a potential company, or if you have like a reseller permit or something like that you're paying, for per state, that's also going to fall into here. And then if you're doing like private labeling, some of those import fees and those tariffs that you might pay, also going to fall into this category. Now, travel expenses and meals and entertainment, both of these things are things that I'm actually deducting at the end of this month. I'm going to fly out to see one of my good buddies that is actually a CPA as well, and we're going to talk about my plan going forward, moving forward this year for my taxes. I do actually have an accountant as well, but it just really helps me out to kind of get somebody that I trust, full-heartedly to give me their opinion on and their expertise, and it also kind of doubles as like a, I'm basically flying out there for business, but I'm deducting it, because it's going to be a good opportunity to kind of double as like a fun way to see him, as well as, a business and traveling expense. So everything, the flight, I'm not staying in a hotel, I'm staying with him, but if I were, that would also be a deduction. If I rented a car, that would be a deduction. All sorts of things like that, and any meals and entertainment that I have while I'm there, basically also a deduction. I put it on my business credit card, and then I pay that off, and I know that that's a deduction at the end of the month. Moving on, now, believe it or not, you can deduct utilities. Now, you can only deduct a portion of your utilities if you're, doing a home business, but if you have an office, then you can deduct all of them. Wages as well, we already talked about, but that's really going to depend on whether you're putting in commissions or contract labor, or wages is going to depend on whether you actually have full-time employees most of the time or not. Now, like I said, all these things are examples of things that I understand and I've deducted before. I wanted to give you examples of these so you can take them and run with them and apply them to your own business. I'm not telling you that you can always deduct these for yourself. Always consult a tax professional.